I decided to surprise my wife Victoria at her job as CEO of Nextcore Technologies with her favorite lunch from that Italian place we used to go to when we were dating. When I walked up to her gleaming headquarters building, I saw a brass sign that stopped me cold. Authorized personnel only, family members prohibited beyond this point. I told the security chief I was Mrs. Caldwell's husband, and he actually laughed at me. "Sir, I've met Mrs. Caldwell's husband many times," he said, pointing across the lobby. "That's him right there." I watched a younger man in a tailored suit walk up to Victoria and kiss her. Not a quick peck. A real kiss. She kissed him back, her hand resting on his chest, exactly the way she used to kiss me 32 years ago. The security chief was still talking, explaining something about company policy, but I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my heart breaking. I turned and walked back to my car before anyone noticed me, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the sandwich in the parking garage. I'm James Caldwell, 60 years old, and after 32 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my wife Victoria. I just retired from marine engineering. I spent my whole career designing offshore oil platforms and ensuring structural integrity on naval projects. I drove home to our 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, the house we bought when Victoria was just a project manager and I was still working on platforms in the Gulf. I walked through rooms filled with 3 decades of memories. Our wedding photo on the mantle, vacation pictures from Yellowstone, the ceramic bowl she made in that pottery class. I realized I'd been living alone in this house for the past 2 years while Victoria worked late, every single night. I found her personal laptop in her home office. She'd left it unlocked, something she never did. The screen showed her email inbox, and I started reading. There were dozens of messages from someone named Preston Ward, planning a romantic trip to Maui next week. A 5-day stay at a luxury resort, with couple spa appointments and sunset sailing. I read through 18 months of affair emails between Victoria and Preston. There were dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend getaways to wine country, late-night hotel stays in the city. But what destroyed me wasn't just the affair itself. It was how casual they were about it, how they planned their future together like I was already gone. I found a document titled, Divorce Strategy Notes, dated 3 weeks earlier. Victoria had written detailed plans about how to minimize what I'd get in the divorce. She calculated that if she filed after the company's IPO, she could claim most assets as separate property from her CEO compensation. There was a line that made my stomach turn. Need to handle the James situation before IPO. Preston says clean break is essential. The James situation. That's what 32 years of marriage had become to her. I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to her new life with Preston. I closed the laptop carefully, placing it exactly where I'd found it. Victoria came home around midnight, looking radiant. She'd had her hair done, styled in a way she never did for me anymore. "You're home early," I said from the couch, and she kissed my cheek with all the warmth of a handshake. Preston had a family emergency and had to leave the office, she said smoothly, and I watched her lie directly to my face without a single flicker of guilt. We sat down to the pasta I'd made for dinner. She talked about her day in that distracted way she'd perfected over the past 2 years, half present, checking her phone constantly. "How was your day?" she asked, not looking up from her screen. I almost told her the truth. Almost described watching her kiss another man in her office lobby. Instead, I said, "Quiet. I'm thinking about taking on some consulting work. Retirement is boring." She barely looked up. "That's nice, honey." I realized she hadn't really looked at me in years. The next morning, after Victoria left for work at 5:30, I started investigating Preston Ward. I used my old professional networks from my engineering days, calling former colleagues who worked in corporate due diligence. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Preston Ward had a pattern. Over the past 12 years, he'd worked at 4 different tech companies as a high-level executive. In each case, he'd targeted the female CEO or founder. In each case, he'd had an affair with her. And in each case, the company had collapsed within 2 years of him leaving, with the CEO taking the blame while Preston walked away wealthy and clean. At his last company, Dataflow Systems in Boston, the CEO had been charged with securities fraud after the company went bankrupt. Preston had left 6 months before the collapse, cashing out stock options worth $8 million. The CEO, a woman named Catherine Torres, was still fighting criminal charges. I found an interview she'd given to a tech blog, where she mentioned her former CEO had misled the board about product capabilities. I called Tom Richardson, my old colleague who now ran a corporate investigation firm in Chicago. We'd worked together on offshore platform projects 20 years ago. James Caldwell, I heard you retired. What's got you doing background checks? He asked cheerfully. I explained I was looking into someone for personal reasons. Tom went quiet when I mentioned Preston Ward's name. James, that guy is bad news. We investigated him 2 years ago for a client. He's under SEC investigation for his role at Dataflow Systems. Nothing's been filed yet, but our sources say they're building a case. Tom sent me his files within an hour. Preston had been the chief operating officer at 3 companies before NextCore. Each time, he'd come in as the charming numbers guy, gotten close to the CEO, and systematically looted the company through fake vendor contracts and inflated consulting fees. By the time anyone noticed, he'd moved on to his next target. Victoria was just his latest mark. That Saturday, Victoria asked me to attend a charity gala, where she was receiving an award for innovation in technology. I said yes, curious to see her world up close. The ballroom was filled with Silicon Valley executives, investors, and tech journalists. I stayed in the background, watching. Preston worked the room beside Victoria, his hand possessively on her lower back. She introduced him to major investors and board members as her partner. Not her business partner. Just partner. They posed for photos together while I stood 20 feet away, invisible. A board member I recognized from NextCore's website walked past me and nodded politely, clearly having no idea who I was. Nobody knew I existed. Victoria had erased me from her professional life so completely that even her own board didn't know she had a husband. I watched her laugh at Preston's jokes, saw how she leaned into him, and understood that I'd already been replaced. I was just waiting for the paperwork. On Monday morning, I drove to the public library and used their computers to research NextCore Technologies. What I found explained everything. NextCore was preparing for a massive initial public offering in 4 months. Based on the company's projected valuation, Victoria and Preston would each make over $50 million when the company went public. Articles in tech publications talked about Victoria as a visionary CEO and Preston as her brilliant CEO, who'd transformed the company's operations. The IPO was scheduled for late September, right after a major product launch and a congressional hearing, where Victoria would testify about maritime technology. The timeline made perfect sense now. Victoria needed to divorce me before the IPO, so Preston could be positioned as her partner when they cashed out. She'd spent 18 months planning this, waiting for the perfect moment to discard me and start her new life. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She'd calculated everything down to the last detail. Something in the articles about NextCore's products caught my attention. Their flagship product was called SmartPort, an automated harbor management system, being installed in major shipping ports. As a marine engineer with 40 years of experience, I knew exactly what that meant. I used my professional credentials to request technical documentation from the Marine Technology Society, claiming I was researching emerging port technologies for a consulting project. What arrived 3 days later horrified me. The SmartPort system's safety protocols were completely inadequate for maritime environments. The load calculations were wrong. The stress modeling didn't account for storm conditions or heavy traffic. The emergency shutdown procedures wouldn't work in real-world scenarios. I'd spent my career ensuring offshore platforms could withstand hurricanes and heavy seas. I could see immediately that SmartPort would fail catastrophically, under the conditions it would actually face in busy ports. This wasn't just bad engineering. This was criminal negligence. People could die. I dug deeper into NextCore's internal documents, using my access to engineering databases and maritime safety networks. I found something that made my hands shake. 6 months ago, NextCore's chief engineer, Dr. Helen Strauss, had submitted a detailed safety report, raising critical concerns about SmartPort. She'd identified the same structural problems I'd spotted, plus several more. She'd recommended a complete redesign that would delay the product launch by at least a year. Victoria and Preston had overruled her. The internal emails I found showed Preston threatening Dr. Strauss's job if she didn't sign off on the specifications as they were. "We have investors and an IPO timeline," Preston had written. "Your concerns are noted, but we're moving forward. Sign the approval or we'll find someone who will." Dr. Strauss had signed. But she'd also documented everything, adding notes to her reports that the approval was given under protest and executive pressure. She'd protected herself legally, while the company rushed a dangerous product to market. I found Dr. Strauss through a professional engineering forum, where she'd posted technical questions about maritime safety standards. I sent her a private message, identifying myself only as a retired marine engineer concerned about SmartPort's specifications. She responded within hours, and we agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Oakland, far from NextCore's headquarters. Dr. Strauss was in her early 40s, with tired eyes and nervous hands. She broke down within minutes of sitting down. "I've been trying to get someone to listen for 6 months," she said. "I can't go to the press because I signed an NDA. I can't go to regulators without proof that'll hold up in court. Victoria and Preston have covered their tracks perfectly." She showed me internal emails on her phone, screenshots of falsified safety reports, and documentation of how Preston had systematically silenced anyone who questioned the product timeline. "They're going to kill people," she whispered. "And I can't stop them alone." Dr. Strauss explained that Preston had been bribing maritime safety inspectors to approve SmartPort installations despite failed stress tests. She had bank records showing payments from shell companies to 3 different inspectors in Seattle, Boston, and Long Beach. The payments totaled over $200,000. "I found these by accident," she said. "I was reviewing vendor payments and noticed consulting fees to companies that don't exist. When I traced them, they led to inspectors who'd signed off on our installations." She'd been documenting everything for months, waiting for the right moment or the right person to help her go public. "If I come forward alone, they'll destroy me," she said. "Victoria has lawyers who'll tie me up in lawsuits for years. Preston will claim I'm a disgruntled employee trying to sabotage the IPO. But if someone with your credentials backs up my technical analysis, if we have independent verification of the safety problems, they can't dismiss it." I told her I'd help. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Dr. Strauss to verify every detail. SmartPort had already been installed in 3 major ports: Seattle, Boston, and Long Beach. Each installation controlled automated crane systems, container routing, and vessel traffic coordination for some of the busiest shipping operations in America. Dr. Strauss's computer models showed that under high-stress conditions, major storms, equipment failures, or heavy traffic, the system would fail catastrophically. In Seattle, a failure could cause automated cranes to drop shipping containers onto vessels or dock workers. In Boston, the traffic coordination system could direct ships into collision courses during poor visibility. In Long Beach, the busiest port in the country, a system failure during peak operations could cause a maritime disaster that would shut down America's supply chain for months. "It's not a question of if," Dr. Strauss said quietly. "It's when. And how many people die when it happens." The weight of that knowledge was crushing. I learned that Victoria had been systematically removing anyone at NextCore who questioned Preston or the product timeline. Over the past year, 5 senior engineers had been fired or forced to resign. The vice president of safety had been let go, after raising concerns about the inspection process. The head of quality assurance had been pushed out, after refusing to sign off on production schedules. Each time, Victoria had replaced them with younger, less experienced people who wouldn't challenge Preston's decisions. But the most significant removal had been Vincent Harper, Nextcore's original founder. Vincent had started the company 15 years ago, built it from a small consulting firm into a major tech player, then stepped back to let Victoria run operations when his wife got sick. Last year, Vincent had confronted Victoria about the safety shortcuts and Preston's influence. Victoria had forced him out, citing philosophical differences about company direction. But Vincent still held 10% of Nextcore's stock, and retained a board seat that Victoria couldn't remove, without a shareholder vote. I tracked down Vincent Harper to a small town in Oregon, where he now ran a modest tech consultancy from his home office. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired and tired-looking. When I explained who I was and why I'd come, his entire demeanor changed. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said. "Someone who could see what they're doing and has the credentials to be taken seriously." Vincent had tried to stop Victoria and Preston a year ago, but without technical expertise in maritime engineering, his concerns had been dismissed, as an old founder unable to adapt to modern business realities. The board had sided with Victoria, who'd convinced them that Vincent was being overprotective and risk-averse. "They made me look like a paranoid old man who couldn't handle the company's growth," Vincent said bitterly. "But I knew something was wrong. Preston's too smooth, too quick with answers. And Victoria changed after he arrived. She used to care about doing things right. Now she only cares about winning." Vincent revealed something that changed everything. He'd been investigating Preston's finances using his board access to company records. What he'd found was systematic embezzlement. Preston had created dozens of fake vendor contracts over the past 2 years, channeling money to shell companies he controlled. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering audits. 10,000 here, 20,000 there, but they added up. Vincent estimated Preston had stolen over $8 million from Nextcore. "The fake vendors are brilliant," Vincent explained, showing me spreadsheets on his laptop. "They're all real companies that do legitimate work for other tech firms. Preston just inflates the invoices and pockets the difference, through offshore accounts. By the time anyone notices, he'll be long gone." I asked if Victoria knew. Vincent shook his head. Either she knows and doesn't care because she's too infatuated, or Preston has her so manipulated she can't see it. Either way, she's going to take the fall when this comes out. Preston will disappear, and Victoria will be left holding the bag. I contacted Alan Shepard, a federal maritime safety investigator I'd worked with 15 years ago on an offshore platform disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. We'd spent 6 months investigating why a platform's emergency systems had failed during a hurricane, ultimately finding that a contractor had falsified inspection reports. Alan had gone on to lead investigations for the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration. I sent him the technical documentation on SmartPort, along with Dr. Strauss's safety analysis, and my own engineering assessment. Alan called me within an hour. "James, this is criminal negligence," he said, his voice grave. "If what you're showing me is accurate, this system shouldn't be operating in any port, let alone 3 major ones. I need to bring this to my supervisors immediately." I told him about the bribed inspectors and the falsified reports. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Alan said, "James, you just handed me a federal case. This is way bigger than product liability. This is fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. I'm opening an investigation today." Alan called me back 2 days later, with information that made the situation even more urgent. The Department of Transportation had been planning to mandate SmartPort-style automated systems for all major U.S. ports within 5 years, based on NextCore's lobbying and Victoria's congressional testimony. The maritime industry had been pushing back, but Victoria had convinced key congressional committees that automation was the future of port safety and efficiency. She testified before Congress 3 months ago. Allen said, "Her presentation was brilliant. All the right statistics, expert endorsements, cost-benefit analyses." Based on her testimony, Congress allocated $2 billion in the infrastructure bill, specifically for port automation systems. NextCore was positioned to win most of those contracts. If SmartPort became the federal standard and it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Hundreds of people could die. America's shipping infrastructure could collapse. And Victoria would be responsible for it all, because she'd chosen Preston and profit over safety and truth. I discovered that Victoria was scheduled to testify before Congress again in 3 weeks. This time, she'd be presenting at a joint committee hearing on transportation infrastructure and national security. The hearing would be broadcast live on C-SPAN and covered by major media outlets. Victoria would be arguing for accelerating the SmartPort rollout to additional ports, citing national security benefits of automated systems that couldn't be disrupted by labor disputes or human error. I found drafts of her testimony on her laptop. Preston had written every word. His fingerprints were all over it. Inflated statistics, cherry-picked data, and glowing assessments from independent experts who were actually paid consultants. The IPO was scheduled for 2 weeks after the congressional hearing. The plan was perfect. Victoria would testify, generating positive media coverage and congressional support. The company's valuation would spike. Then they'd go public, cash out their stock, and be worth over $100 million combined. By the time anyone discovered the problems with SmartPort, they'd be untouchable. While Victoria was on her Maui trip with Preston, I used my key to enter her home office. I felt justified breaking her privacy after everything she'd done, after reading about the James situation in her divorce strategy. I found what I was looking for in a locked drawer, a burner phone she used only for Preston. The messages revealed everything. They weren't just planning to leave the country after the IPO. They were planning to abandon NextCore entirely and let it collapse. "Once we cash out, we give it 6 months," Preston had written. "The product failures will start. The lawsuits will come. But we'll be in Grand Cayman with our money in untouchable accounts." Victoria can claim she was deceived by her engineering team. She'll pay some fines, maybe get banned from being a CEO for a few years, but we keep the money. Victoria had responded, "What about the people who might get hurt?" Preston's reply made my blood boil. "Not our problem. We'll be on a beach." I photographed every message, every document, every piece of evidence in Victoria's office. I discovered that Preston had already purchased a villa in Grand Cayman, under a shell company registered in the British Virgin Islands. He'd done this before. I found property records showing he'd bought luxury homes in the Cayman Islands and Panama after his previous company collapses. This was his pattern, refined over years. Seduce a female tech CEO, convince her to cut corners and inflate valuations, manipulate her into fraud, then cash out in an IPO or acquisition. He'd disappear to a non-extradition country with millions, while she faced the criminal charges and civil lawsuits. He'd done it to Catherine Torres at Dataflow Systems. He'd done it to 2 other women before her. Now he was doing it to Victoria. Part of me wanted to warn her, to show her who Preston really was. But she'd made her choice. She'd chosen him over me, over safety, over basic human decency. She deserved what was coming. Victoria returned from Maui on Sunday evening, tan and relaxed. On Monday morning, she asked me to have breakfast with her. She made coffee and toast, moving around our kitchen, with the casual ease of someone about to deliver rehearsed lines. "James, we need to talk about our future," she began. "I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore. We've grown apart. You're retired and want a quiet life. I'm building something big, and need a partner who understands that world. I let her talk. She offered me a settlement she'd clearly workshopped with lawyers. I'd keep the house and my pension. She'd keep everything else. Her Nextcore stock, the investment accounts, the vacation home. I need you to sign the papers this week, she said, before things get complicated with the IPO. She needed me gone before she became worth $50 million. I looked at my wife of 32 years and saw a stranger. I need time to think, I said. She smiled, relieved. Of course, take a few days. But James, this is the right thing for both of us. 3 weeks later, Nextcore held its final investor presentation before the IPO. The ballroom at the San Francisco Hyatt was packed with venture capitalists, investment bankers, board members, and federal officials from the Department of Transportation. Victoria stood at the podium in a navy suit, looking confident and powerful. She presented SmartPort's capabilities, the congressional support, the $2 billion in federal contracts. Investors were nodding, already calculating their returns. Then the back doors opened. Alan Shepard walked in with 2 FBI agents and a woman from the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Excuse me," Alan said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "I'm Alan Shepard, with the Department of Transportation's Maritime Safety Administration. We need to address some urgent safety concerns before this presentation continues." Victoria's face went pale. The room erupted in confused whispers. Alan gestured to me. "This is James Caldwell, a retired marine engineer with 40 years of experience. He served as an expert witness in our investigation into SmartPort's safety violations. Mr. Caldwell, please present your findings." I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. For the next 30 minutes, I presented my engineering analysis of SmartPort's critical failures. I showed the inadequate load calculations, the faulty stress modeling, and the failure scenarios that Dr. Strauss and I had documented. Dr. Strauss stood and verified every technical claim. Vincent Harper presented the evidence of Preston's embezzlement and the systematic silencing of safety concerns. Alan showed the proof of bribed inspectors. The FBI agents announced that Preston Ward was under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Federal marshals moved to the side of the room, where Preston had been standing. He tried to run but was tackled before reaching the door. Victoria stood frozen at the podium as an SEC investigator approached her. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're under investigation for criminal negligence, falsifying federal safety documents, and securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent." She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. I saw shock, thrill, and finally understanding. "James?" she whispered. I walked past her without a word. 6 months later, my life was completely different. Preston was serving 15 years in federal prison. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that this was his 4th company fraud scheme, and people could have died from SmartPort's failures. Victoria lost everything. She'd been fired from Nextcore immediately after her arrest. The IPO was cancelled. The board filed a civil lawsuit against her for the company's losses. She faced criminal charges for falsifying federal documents and was looking at 3 to 5 years in prison if convicted. Our divorce was finalized, and I'd kept far more than her insulting original offer. Her lawyers advised her to be generous, since her legal position had collapsed completely. Nextcore hired me as a special consultant to redesign SmartPort properly. I worked alongside Dr. Strauss, who'd been promoted to Chief Technology Officer. Vincent Harper returned as chairman. The 3 of us worked to fix what Victoria and Preston had broken, ensuring the system would actually save lives instead of ending them. I was having coffee with Dr. Strauss, not as colleagues but as 2 people who'd fought for what was right. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Respected. Free. I became myself again. Victoria is out of my picture. Completely. No anger, No bitterness. Just two people who had once meant everything to each other, now living their separate lives. I continued working, feeling grateful. Grateful for hard lessons. Grateful for the healing. Grateful for second chance. That sign outside NextCore had changed my life. It had forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding for years. While the truth had hurt, it had also set me free. Finally. Free to rebuild myself. Free to find genuine love again. Free to become the man I was always meant to be. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best transformations. And as I stepped into my new role, ready to embrace my new future, I realized something profound. Losing someone who didn't value you isn't a loss. It's a liberation. I left the past behind, and heading toward a future filled with possibility, respect, and real love. The kind of love that doesn't need signs to keep people out. The kind of love that invites you in. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take from this powerful story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. If you have been touched by this story, or it has provoked something in you, please give it a thumbs up, and share it with others who needs to learn from it. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and click the notification bell to be updated with another story that could change your perspectives. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, you're worth the love that respects you, values you, and never makes you feel like you need their permission to exist. Stay blessed. I'll see you tomorrow for the next story.